Fairness means giving money to help the poorest in our society. People who are sick, who are vulnerable, the elderly. I want you to know we will always look after you. Fairness does mean asking those on higher incomes to shoulder more of the burden than those on lower incomes. People who are sick, who are vulnerable, the elderly. I want you to know we will always look after you. If you really cannot work, we will always look after you.
We want MPs, we want party spokespeople, and we want ministers to listen, and just listen well to the statements that they've made. And what do they want us to say? Well, I've asked WOW practitioners, what do you want me to say and other MPs to say in today's debate? And they've said, we want you to get across as best you can what the welfare changes have brought in over the last 4 years have meant to us and our families, the stark reality. Why do they want this? Well, maybe naively, they believe that if MPs and ministers really knew what it's like, what disabled people are going through, they would not stand by and let fellow human beings suffer and be degraded in this way. 2.7 million people with disabilities live in poverty, and it's this group that the welfare cuts are hurting the most. I remember in 2010 when the government launched its austerity programme to cut public spending. I remember the Prime Minister's own statements. To quote the Prime Minister in October 2010, it's fair that those with broader shoulders should bear a greater load, and the greatest burden would be placed on the better off. The cuts, if they were to be made, would be fair.
Fairness does mean asking those on higher incomes to shoulder more of the burden than those on lower incomes. But it is fair that those with broader shoulders should bear a greater load.
Well, the reverse is the case. The vast majority of disabled people I've met, and most of us have met, are desperate to work. They're desperate to live like any other employed person, supporting their families with a regular wage. But for some, the tragedy is that their disability is so severe that they'll never be able to work, and they will need to rely upon welfare benefits to ensure they don't live in poverty. For others, what they need is positive and sensitive practical support to help them get back into work or into work at all. The system that's been introduced over the last 6 years to support people in securing work or the appropriate benefits could not have been designed better to undermine the ability of disabled people to get into work or receive the appropriate benefits to assist them. The last government started the process of reassessing all those on incapacity benefit to see if a person could be assisted back into work, and if not, to ensure that they had the right level of financial support. It introduced the work capability assessment and brought in Atos to implement it. In theory, it might have been well-intentioned, but in practice, thousands of disabled people have been caused untold suffering, humiliation, stress, and at times, absolute despair.
Would the Honourable Gentleman also recognise that the introduction of the work capability assessment under his government and my government and our government was actually in a phased way, and part of the distress that the gentleman, my honourable friend, has mentioned has been due to the fact that that contract was renegotiated and we went for a big bang of assessments and reassessments for everyone who was on incapacity benefit.
The work capability assessment was flawed from the start. It stemmed from the work of the American insurance company Unum, this so-called biosocial model of disability assessment, and that was exposed as an invention by the insurance company simply to avoid paying out claims. But my honourable friend is right. Atos was brought in and then given a contract to churn through large numbers of assessments very rapidly in recent years, as fast as possible. And to do this, the staff that were employed often had minimal medical or professional qualifications, and often with expertise or experience totally unrelated to the person's condition or disability they were assessing. The assessment largely disregarded the person's existing diagnosis, prognosis, or even life expectancy. The recent Panorama programme, Disabled or Faking It, exposed the scandal of seriously ill patients diagnosed with life-threatening conditions such as heart failure and end-stage emphysema being found fit for work. The so-called descriptors or criteria on which the assessment is based bear no relation to the potential employment available, take little account of fluctuating conditions and are particularly unresponsive to appreciating mental health issues.
The situation that one of my constituents was in, who was receiving ESA, he was having a heart attack during his assessment and he was sanctioned as a result of leaving that. I've called for the government for an independent review for the inappropriate use of sanctions. They committed to that in the Select Committee and now they're reneging on this. Isn't this a disgrace?
Example after example have been brought forward by members like that, who simply looked for some compassion and also some logic in the governance of this system, and the government have ignored that tragically.
There was a lady saying to me this morning, Mr. Lavery, do you understand what it's like to be treated like an animal? And I mean, that rocked me. Why should disabled people feel as if they're being herded into a corner and treated like animals? It's because they probably feel that way. They feel not even now as if they're a statistic. They're not even counted in life anymore, other than being an embarrassment to society. They feel as if they're personal rejects because of being disabled, sick and unwell. Total outcasts to society. We shouldn't be making people feel like that here in one of the richest countries in the world. Right. The attack on the disabled and the vulnerable is relentless, Mr. Deputy Speaker. In people, disabled people, the sick, people who have been sick for many years, people who might have just been sick or disabled in the past few years, need a voice. And we shouldn't forget, it's fantastic being able-bodied and well in health. But you're just around the corner, some of us, from being poorly, from being disabled, or being sick and unwell and perhaps terminally ill. And we shouldn't forget that when we're making decisions in here to hammer the disabled and the vulnerable, because we could be next. Yeah. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I was again discussing the waiting. We put ourselves in some of these people's shoes. They become ill or they've been ill. They attend test after test. They attend the ATOS centres where the people sit behind the Little Britain type scenario where the computer says no. There isn't any flexibility. I want we to just try and put ourselves in the shoes of these people who face these tests. And then they leave the test centre and they're waiting for weeks and weeks and weeks. In fact, they're waiting months and months and months on the envelope dropping through the door to tell them whether they've actually been accepted for benefits or not. Can you imagine these people, particularly people who have got mental problems, can you imagine how they feel every morning looking for that envelope? And people who are looking for ESA, GSA, who are being sanctioned for different reasons. I've got somebody who was sanctioned by the DWP because he was in hospital having an appointment because of a severe heart condition. He got sanctioned and he didn't have anything, he didn't have any food, any money to put food on the table for months because of a hospital appointment. There's been suggested here that people have been in a coma and they've been sanctioned because of being on a hospital bed in intensive care. Is this a way to treat ordinary human beings? And the answer to that, of course, it isn't.
The welfare state, by and large, in the Macmillan era, and even in the Heathkey-Joseph era, the welfare state was a status quo, by and large. And I have to say this, and I'll probably never say it again, even in the Thatcher years, this chaos did not happen. She did a lot of things. She privatised all the public utilities and everything else. She smashed the pits and all the rest of it. But, by and large, we never had capability assessments. And we never had a march by 3,000 blind and disabled people which heralded the beginning of this coalition. I'd never seen one. I was on crutches at the time because I'd got a hip replacement, and I thought, well, I qualify for this march, I'd better get on it. And there were blind people telling me then about what was likely to happen. And I hardly believed them, but the truth is that we now know about all the mess that's been created. For those people that I met down at the Atos headquarters last Wednesday, I went there, and I have to tell you, it wasn't a trade union gathering. It was a different gathering altogether. There were more wheelchairs than there were police. That's what it was like. Fancy speaking to a crowd of 70 to 100 people, and you were surrounded by people on wheelchairs. People that have been crippled for years. Many of them, like my constituent David Kaup, had been for the work capability assessment and been turned down. And they were too disabled to even get out of the wheelchair without help. That was the kind of crowd I was speaking to. This was about disabled people who wanted somebody to speak up for them, and many are in the House of Commons today, and we met some this morning, and there are loads of them. They tell me I'm not supposed to refer to it in the public gallery. They are different, and it's high time that in this country, where we're made of money, so we're told that money by the Prime Minister is no object. Yeah. That's what he said. And that's what I told him last Wednesday. I said, you know, I wish he'd say money was no object for the disabled people. Really is a scandal. And now, with this business of Atos, this lousy, rotten firm that's in charge, for a while anyway, so I'm told, and then they're going to move on to some other pastures. Now we've got literally hundreds and thousands of people being turned down. And now David Kaup had got cancer. And for 10 months he waited for an appeal, and he died before he had a chance. That's the chaos that we're living in today. And it's high time that people understood it and got rid of this mess and realised this is a country that's got enough money to give those on Millionaires Row at over £150,000 a year a tax cut. There's enough money for Trident. There's enough money for all kinds of things that governments love to do. Well, here we are with an ageing society and a lot more disabled people. What's wrong with that? We should be providing for them. And the reason why they're on demonstrations like they never did before is because they're desperate people wanting us to do something to help them.
That's why the central demand of this petition is very straightforward. Today's motion is to call, in essence, for a cumulative impact assessment of all the welfare changes that have been introduced by this government. And the argument that they've put forward is that if politicians and society only knew the full effect of all these changes on the lives of disabled people and their families, surely they would not let this happen in a civilised society.
The French IT company was responsible for means testing the disabled and walked away from its contract in March. But who is going to replace the firm that made millions of disabled people suffer? Apparently, the 3.5-year contract is going to the US multinational group Maximus Inc., who we will pay around £500 million to process benefits for the poorest in society. Alas, Maximus's past is one that includes having to settle criminal investigations for falsified Medicaid claims over in the USA. In fact, the list goes on when it comes to the scandal-hit firm. Disabled people of Britain, you have been warned.